Hello, my name is Kristen Miller Zohn, and I'm the Curator of Collections and Exhibitions at the Lauren Rogers Museum of Art in Laurel, Mississippi. And I'm speaking today with artist Curlee Raven Holton. This is the latest in a series of conversations with artists whose work has been added to the museum's collection over the last few years. Thank you so much for speaking with me today, Curlee. It's a pleasure to see you.
Oh, I'm honored to have an opportunity to speak with you, Kristen. This is great.
So you earned your Bachelor of Fine Arts from the Cleveland Institute of Fine Arts and your Master of Fine Arts from Kent State University. Did you grow up in Ohio?
I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, not too far from Kent. About an hour and a half from Kent State University. But I went.
And so you wanted to stay close to home?
No, actually, I got accepted to the Chicago Institute of Art and was considering it, but decided to. Before I went to the Chicago Institute of Art, I wrote a letter to the director of the gallery at Kent State University asking for an opportunity to show my work at the university. And I said, oh, by the way, we see that you also applied here at Kent. If you decide to come, we'd give you a full scholarship and a stipend to advise students on a publication about the arts. And of course, I had a wife and children. I said, well, yeah, this is great. So let me go. And I had done a lot of work in Cleveland. I was actually at the point where it was almost time for me to leave Cleveland. What I mean by that, I had showed at the Contemporary Center, the museum, and a number of other major institutions. And so I didn't want to keep repeating myself. I wanted to expand my horizons. So I was prepared artistically and emotionally to make that journey out of Cleveland.
Right.
That was to New York City.
Wow. Well, so that is quite, I grew up in Cleveland myself, so I know that was culture shocked from going from Cleveland to New York.
I think a Amtrak from Cleveland near the lake where they have the museum for rock and roll. And I took a train there in the middle of the night, arrive at Grand Central Station in New York City at 8 in the morning.
Wow.
On a Friday morning, I'd work 3 or 4 days at the Bob Blackburn workshop, get back on the train again, come back to Cleveland, work in Cleveland for 3 or 4 days. I kept doing that for maybe a year before I decided to spend some extended time in New York City at the workshop.
Mm-hmm. So how long did you live in New York?
Probably a total of 3 years. And then I was at the workshop one day and there was a phone call from the chairman of the art department at Lafayette College calling Bob Blackburn, who's a really renowned African-American printmaker, master printer. And they called Bob and said, well, you know, we're looking for someone that could teach African-American art history and also had a studio practice, specifically printmaking. And he said, I have the perfect guy for you. So he came to me and whispered to me, you better make this phone call, follow up before I tell anyone else in the workshop. And you know, you have maybe 20 artists working in that workshop. And the person that referred the chairman of the art department to Bob Blackburn was the artist Grace Hardigan.
Oh, wonderful.
Said, who, you know, do you know anyone? They said, of course, Bob Blackburn. And that's how I got connected to Lafayette College. But before I came to Lafayette College, my introduction really to the art was indirect. I had always done art in high school, even elementary school. And I had met a number of mature artists. After I got out of the military, I drafted during Vietnam. When I got out of the military, I met a number of mature artists that had gatherings on the east side of Cleveland where artists would come and talk and share information. So that was my first introduction to the possibility of being an artist, even that role model as an artist. And that happened a few years before I decided to go to the Institute of Art on a regular basis. But I was what they call a bent arrow. It took me 10 years to get through the Institute because I had family and I worked full time as well.
Right, right. Now, so how did you get interested in printmaking in particular?
Well, it was really by happenstance. There was an activist in the community who was looking for artists to create works of art that could be sold to help support the ANC in South Africa, the African National Congress. This was during apartheid. So I agreed to do a print. I had never made a print before. They thought it was a great idea because they said, well, if you do a print, you can sell a number of them, not just one. So I went into the Institute after hours at night, asked a printmaking student to help guide me. I made my first lithograph. And I was captured by it, I think, for two reasons. One is this sort of notion of democracy in art. Printmaking is the most democratic form of artwork in that you can share with large numbers of people, and in most cases is very affordable. The second was the mix of physical labor and technology. Even though it was low technology in terms of a printing press, the relationship between the labor and the idea that you could use your body and your heart, creativity, and your mind to produce an art object was so seductive to me. And I came from a family of people that work with their hands. My father grew up on a farm, came to Cleveland when I was actually a child, in my mother's arms. And she rode a train with my two siblings from Mississippi, from Meridian, Mississippi to Cleveland, Ohio.
Wow.
So I'd always witnessed these men around me who were very well built, their hands were large from manual labor, but they were very proud of labor. They were very proud of what they could do physically. And so that was around me, and that did influence me. So this was a certain kind of perfect relationship, because art was not necessarily primary. And I didn't understand what the art world was about. I really, I'm going to school. I know I have to travel down this road. I had no idea where the road was going, but I know I had to travel this road. So I went to the Institute of Art primarily because I knew the only way I would really have access to the art world was through an institution like the Cleveland Institute of Art, through teachers, fellow students, because I grew up in Cleveland. That was a very segregated city for a long time. So I knew I wouldn't have access unless I went to a predominantly white institution, which I did, and the teacher was great. And, of course, I discovered that artists like Huey Lee Smith and others had attended the Institute years before. I actually got a chance as a student to introduce Huey Lee Smith to the class. So it was quite amazing. But as I mentioned, I was also supporting a family while I was doing this, and they were very encouraging. And I remember I finished my BFA thesis presentation, and I left the thesis presentation to go into the restroom. I was standing in the restroom at the sink, and one of my professors came in, and he was washing his hands, and he looked at me, and I was an older student because I had family. He says, "You can do it, Curlee. You can do it." I've never forgot that he said that to me, that I could do it. So those kind of reinforcements. I had one teacher that said, "Well, Curlee, you're a good artist." And for him, that was quite a compliment. He was really a great printmaker. He says, "You're a good artist, Curlee." And of course, that was enough encouragement, because that kind of encouragement wasn't coming from my family. My family, the only literature in the household, my family, was a Bible and Ebony or Jet magazines, sometimes a Sears catalog, you know what I mean? So you really weren't introduced to the arts. And my father, for a long time, was so proud of me that after the military, I got a position at Ford Motor Company, and I was promoted to a supervisor. So I had the white helmet and the blue jacket. And my father was so proud of me. He would introduce me to his friends as the supervisor at Ford Motor Company. And I said, "Well, Dad, I'm not really that anymore. I'm in school. I'm becoming this artist." He would never introduce me as artist until I had an exhibition at Akron University, and they taped it, they filmed it, and then they promoted it that evening on a talk show, a local talk show, at dinner time. So I went to my parents for dinner, and all my siblings used to come by my parents and sit for dinner, especially on Sundays. So I said, "Well, let me come over for dinner and we can talk and sit down after dinner." And I sat him down in front of the television and turned to the program. My father saw me on television, and from that moment on, he introduced me as artist.
How wonderful.
On television. So it was a slow.
If it's on TV, it must be true.
It must be true. And the reason I'm talking about it this way, it was a very slow, indirect process, and that's why my teacher described me as a bent arrow, that I was coming the long way around to the target.
Right.
And it had taken me quite a while, but that's okay too, because it allowed me to gather some experiences and a certain perspective when I began to practice.
Right. Some life knowledge to put into your artwork.
Has served me well, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would love to hear about the founding of the Experimental Printmaking Institute. Can you give us some background about that, and just tell us what your mission is for the Institute?
As I mentioned, I was at Bob Blackburn's, so I was witnessing a number of things at the workshop. Artists like Romeo Bearden, he had printed with just so many major artists. Jasper Johns, he had printed with all these artists. And so he created a workshop. This is the first nonprofit printmaking workshop in the US. And it was really about welcoming people. Sometimes he was struggling financially. Sometimes the landlord was about to evict him, but he's always generous. When you arrived, he would introduce you to everyone. And artists like so many major artists had walked through those doors. Herb Gentry, Benny Andrews were artists that had connected with Bob, especially when they came to New York City. He was a destination. He was a place you could, connect with. So when I first arrived, I said, well, Bob, I need to find a place to sleep, some place to stay. He said, well, you can sleep here in the workshop on one of those presses. I said, sleep on a printing press? He said, yeah, Rauschenberg did it, you can do it. So, so it was that kind of environment. And by the time I got to Lafayette College, which was it was predominantly white institution, 94% white. Now that's significant, not racially, but culturally significant. And that in many ways, my cultural experience, although I'd had a very integrated experience, my cultural focus was kind of isolated. So I tried to create a world around me that supported that perspective. And I made a lot of artwork. And I remember one colleague who was a professor from Africa said, well, we were talking, I said, I'm making so much art, I must have some kind of profound anxiety going on in my life. He says, no, what you're doing is creating your world around you, is what you're doing.
Your own environment.
I was creating my own environment. And so the workshop came out of this basic principle that we created more when we worked together than what we created on our own. And that I was always interested in diverse voices, and I brought those voices to Lafayette College. So it expanded my possibilities and expanded my sense of space. And I remember when I first got to Lafayette, the question that I was always asked is, how am I doing with Lafayette? In a place that was pretty racially limited, culturally limited, very wealthy institution. I said, the question is not how I'm doing with you. The question is how you're doing with me. The challenge is, I'm not having a challenge being in this environment because I've been in diverse environments. You're having a challenge with me, adjusting to me, which was true. So, but they allowed me also in many ways administratively to give me the space to define myself. So I created the workshop one summer in 1996. I asked a board of trustee member whose wife was involved with arts in some indirect way. And he was a very successful publisher, and he asked me, could he help? I said, well, I don't know what to ask for. I said, I've never had any experience asking a patron or a benefactor for anything. I'm unfamiliar with it. He said, well, just tell me what you're going to do, what you'd like to do, and what it might cost. And I told him, and he wrote the check. I began that summer with the artist Juan Chanchez from Brooklyn, New York, as the first, and we never completed that project. But after that, the next artist I printed was Faith Ringo. And I printed Faith, I think probably up until 2015, maybe.
Okay.
So that was the introduction. Now, Lafayette was really a fortunate place for me, not only because it was stable, the resources were there, and I had a workshop created within the academic institution, where Bob Blackburn was outside and was always a financial struggle. Here, I wouldn't have the same struggle to maintain space, student support, materials. That was going to be provided. I didn't have to worry about the lights being on or the heat in the winter. Those essentials are being provided, although I had to raise my own resources to support projects that I was engaged in, artists coming in out of the country, traveling, things like that. So again, the point was to gather artists from different backgrounds to create a different kind of language. So I would have artists come from South Africa, Europe, of course, Latin America, Japan, Taiwan, and sometimes we couldn't speak any of the languages. But I was always a believer that art was universal and transcendent languages and different. And that project was only proof to me that was possible. So
Right,
it began
right.
changes and I began to travel to other countries, bringing young artists in to give them apprenticeships. So it was a very rich, dynamic experience. And of course, we were producing fantastic works. In addition to Faith Ringo, Sam Gilliam came very early in the process. I remember Mel Edwards came in and he said, I heard about you. He came. And then he brought William T. Williams, and he told William T. said, well, Mel told us it was the best thing next to heaven for an artist. And William T. said, well, how many prints can I make? I says, well, we like to do small editions, maybe 50. He said, no, I don't mean that. How many different prints can I make? Richard Anaskevich, Stephen Antonakis, Grace Hardigan, Neen Humphrey. We produce over 150 artists.
Amazing, amazing list.
25 years that I was at Lafayette.
Wonderful. So not only were you involved with that organization as a founder, but in 2014, you were appointed executive director of the David C. Driscoll Center for the Study of the Visual Arts and Culture of African Americans and the African Diaspora at University of Maryland, College Park. Can you tell us about the center and its mission?
Yes, the center was established in 2001, and the mission was to celebrate the legacy of Dr. Driscoll, who was the foremost authority on African American art, who had established that seminal exhibition of 2 centuries of Black art, 1776 to 1976. So it had made him a major figure in the art world. He did other exhibitions and other publications. So he was, in many ways, the academic and scholarly authority on that material. And he brought that material into wider acceptance. And I think sometimes, and we've been talking about him a lot lately, you know, he passed the first week of April, which was tragic for all of us. Last week, we did a tribute at the National Gallery of Art in honor of him. Had thousands of people zooming in, can you imagine this? And paying tribute. And, you know, there were Carrie Mae Weems, Frank Smith, artists from all over, and it was just very tearful because David had done something extremely unique. Besides being a scholar and an artist and an educator, he had did 2 really important things. He had invited the community into the museum that had never been invited before, because by these museums hosting this body of work, that audience was now invited to come into the museum. So an African American, you got to understand the history of African American audience in museums. Up until the late 60s, they had colored day at the museum where blacks would only come a certain day during the week. So they really didn't have access to the fine arts. David built a bridge for that, argued for the validity of that artistic expression. So I think that was really major, plus he became an authority, which was a rare thing to encounter an African American that was an authority of anything. He was an authority. And I'm still dealing with that whole meaning right now. I've been writing about that a little bit. But so David Driscoll had just a phenomenal career. He received the National Medal of Humanities from President Clinton, over a dozen honorary doctorates. And the museum, not the museum, but the University of Maryland, on the occasion of his retirement, tried to persuade him not to retire by establishing this cultural center. And he retired anyway. He placed all his archives in the center as a gift.
All of his research archives.
We're talking about letters, handwritten letters from Romare Beard and Charles White, Elizabeth Catlett, a letter by Elizabeth Catlett where she doodles all around the edges, and it says, please, David, get my last $250 from that collector. You know, it's amazing to see that picture of how David researched this material and captured this material. So I was introduced to David first, not the institution. In 2003, David was visiting Lafayette College, and I invited him to the workshop. He saw that I've been printing Mel Edwards and Faith Ringo, and he wanted to join the club. Now, he was known primarily as a a scholar, but he was always a practicing artist. So we made our first print in 2003 called Brown Derby. And we produced over 40 unique editions up until his death. And the last edition we were working on was for the Hyde Museum of Art. But during this process, I became aware of the David C. Driscoll Center. Not directly, I don't think I ever visited up to this point. The director of the center was at a dinner with a collector just outside Philadelphia. The collector's Louis Tanner Moore, who is the great-great-grandnephew of Henry O. Tanner.
Okay.
So the collector was at his home. He got Tanners all on the wall. He doesn't want me to announce this, but, you know, I've never seen anybody have this much art, you know, and he grew up in it, of course. And he called me that evening, and he owns my work also, and he says, Curlee, there's a collector here that saw one of your pieces on the wall and would like to buy it if you're going to replace it for me. So I said, yes, sell it. You know, so we sold it. That collector was the director of the David C. Driscoll Center, who would come and decide he wanted to purchase a print of every edition I had ever made at the workshop.
How wonderful. Did he accomplish his goal?
No, not completely, but he did. He made a real effort. He did great. And so in 2012, I was on the board of the Driscoll Center advisory board, and they did a search that was a failed search, and he pleaded with me to consider it. I said, well, you know, I'm an endowed chair. I had an endowed chair, and there was only one of 3 African-American artists in the country with endowed chairs in the visual arts, and I was one of them. I said, I have a workshop I founded. I'm the chairman of the art department, so I really haven't made. I don't have to work a lot. I work, you know, I come in a few days a week, and I do my work. I got support. Why would I leave this? He said, well, I tell you what, just come down for a little while for a meeting. And I came to the meeting, and in the meeting was the Dean of Fine Arts. And the conversation began, well, Curlee, if we could work out some arrangement, what would be acceptable? I said, well, if I could come down 1 day a week and you know, provide some guidance and support offsite, I would consider it. They said, done deal, done. So I went as an interim director and eventually became the permanent director when I retired from Lafayette.
Okay, so you got to do everything.
I got to do everything. In one moment, I was directing the Driscoll Center, chairman of the art department, director of the Experimental Printmaking Institute, and doing my own practice in the studio, all of it at the same time.
Gracious, and no sleeping.
No sleeping, and my wife, of course, complained, and my children complained. I would invite them into the studio to witness me. So, but it worked out. They were very supportive. So,
if you want to see me, come to the studio.
Yeah, you asked this question that makes me think about something I hadn't really formulated. Is when I went to Driscoll Center, I was a little uncomfortable. I was unsure of myself. I had been an administrator and I had raised money for the workshop at Lafayette College. But this was a different expectation than the one that I had. I was really an entrepreneur in the arts, and that's how I created it. This was different. This had a mission, not my mission, someone else's mission. And again, I mentioned that mission was to celebrate Dr. Driscoll and achievements, but also to expand on the field and create a home for artists of color. And I wasn't sure I was the right person for this, but it took me some time to realize that I had been preparing myself for this all along. The teaching of African American art, working in the studio with David, and working with all those major artists who now I could pick up the phone and call. For example, I called Richard Hunt not too long ago about a project. I said, Richard, this is Curlee Holton. I'm the director of Driscoll Center formerly. He says, you don't need to tell me who you are. I know who you are. So it's kind of interesting that I really have prepared myself for the role without ever having that ambition.
Right,
It's
right.
interesting how you arrive at places and locations without that being your plan. You know,
Well,
so
yes, life prepares you for what it wants to, and when that finds you,
yes.
It's an amazing thing.
I've told my friends every now and then, they get kind of disturbed, I'll say, well, there's no such thing as a future. They say, what do you mean there's no future? I'm saying whatever you imagine tomorrow is not going to be like you imagined it. So every day, every moment is out of your control. It may look like what you want it to look like, but it's not what you imagined. And we throw ourselves into the future and we encounter it, but I don't think we can design much of it,
Right. Well, so let's look at some fruits of your labor. I am going to turn myself off and I'm going to share my screen. And we are going to look at some of your work. So I'm just going to scroll through these slides. You can tell me when you'd like me to go to the next one.
Okay.
But this is a work of yours, a recent work from 2020.
Yes. This is called Hands Up Nemus. Hands Up is a reference to some of the social protests in response to Black males and the dynamic they've had with the police, or the brutality, or the struggle. And we're all very familiar with this because of the protests over the last year. This figure is both surrendering, but also has a divine-like gesture. So Nemus is a
I'm
real...
so sorry, Curlee. I'm sorry. My computer did something weird. Hold on just a second.
Sure.
I want to start us over from, let's see. I want to share the screen again, and I want to do it this way. And I need to turn off my email because it made a ding in the middle of what you were saying, and it's important, and I want everybody to be able to hear it. So let's go back.
Great.
And we are going to say, okay, so let's see. I want to, from current slide. Okay, let me just go through and make sure that sometimes, stop sharing screen. I want to do the screen, not the applications. Okay. Yeah. Sometimes when you share the application instead of the screen, it cuts the bottom off, and you can't see all of the stuff on the screen. So I'm just going to make sure that I can see everything, all the captions and stuff at the bottom.
Yep, looks good.
Yeah, looks good. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to take it from, I'm going to say, let's look at some of the fruit of your labor. And this is a recent work from 2020. Can you tell us about it?
Yes, it's titled Hands Up. And this was inspired by the current protest that has been going on in relationship to police brutality and the vulnerability of young Black men, and how this has been a reoccurring problem. And Hands Up represent a certain kind of surrender when faced with the threat of police brutality. So this is a young Black male, but I tried to present him almost like a divine figure, almost like a Christ-like figure. Now the halo, which originally was called Nemus. Nemus is the halo that was provided to denote achievement at war, great public recognition. It wasn't a divine symbol until much later. It wasn't a Christian symbol. It was, so I placed it around his head as a reference to indicate his value, that he was possibly a heroic figure that was being sacrificed. And then in the pocket, you see a little stroke of red, and that's actual blood from my hand while I was working on this. So wow. It is a drawing about someone that's outside of my direct experience, but I connect to it by actually having a mark of my own blood on the t-shirt, as if he is also an indicator of the violence that he may be suffering in the public space.
Right, right. It's powerful. So this is the rest. The next few slides are from a series called the Deluge Series.
Yeah, the Deluge Series I've done it as a series of 9 ink drawings So I would do the ink drawing and do the painting. And I did this over a 2-year period, maybe a 1.5 year period. And what I was trying to do is create images, although they make reference to a deluge water. It really is not about water. It's about a deluge in life, emotional deluge. How we have to adjust to things that are beyond our control, things that may overwhelm us, things that may put us at risk. And then when we're faced with these things, what becomes important? And this particular image is called Release. What is a young man holding on to? What is the thing you grab when you're about to lose everything? And you can see he's swimming, where individuals in the background are in a tree. They're not going anywhere. So some individuals choose to hold on to the little things they have. Others take risk out in the world to survive. Although they're surviving, they're also putting themselves at greater risk. So this is called release. What are you able to release and let go of? There's a great Buddhist saying, have less, have more, have nothing, have everything. So the next piece continues this series of work, and I do it in stages. This is called Lamentation. And there's a mound of people, how they gather as a group, almost as a herd. And they're in a large mound, and to their left or right, they see a figure on a giant anthill. This is the prophet figure. This is the figure giving vision and sight. Because of the height, he could actually see the horizon and see what might be threatening and what might not be threatening. So some individuals recognize him and some don't. So again, this is a reference to the lament, the struggle. Rather than taking action, they're frozen in this moment of terror and fear, and they're lamenting their situation rather than taking action to confront their situation. So again, this is acrylic on board. And I try to play with textures. You know, I'm the kind of artist where there's no requirement. I don't have an aesthetic requirement, a subject requirement, because one thing about being an artist that is not so institutionalized, you can select choices, you can make work based upon your own interests. And if the audience respond to it, that's a good thing, but that's not the primary motivation for me.
Mm-hmm. You can really see that impasto in the clouds up at the top.
The clouds, the water is built up in texture, and I want the clouds to be almost three-dimensional. You know, that they have body, they have substance. Just because I was interested in it, I wasn't trying to paint a cloud like a cloud, but to paint something that was symbolic of a cloud.
Right, right.
This is resilience. This is another part of the series. In this particular case, she is standing, this woman, female figure, that's actually a collector mine. She's standing with great resilience against a storm. You see the house is turned upside down. You see the tree is uprooted and reversed, and the torrential waters to her coming into the foreground. But when they get to her, they slow down and they recede and they stop, because she is resilient, she is resolute. And our maternal figures play this role for us. They're stable, they have weathered a lot of storms, and they can give us guidance and advice, and don't be so shaken. I remember there's a saying by not Lois Mailey Jones, but Maya Angelou, where she whispers in the ear of a young woman who's struggling, if I can survive it, you can survive it. So this potential comes from individuals that have stood against the storm and have, with resilience, and have survived it. Mm-hmm. So these are all metaphors. The water is a metaphor for the threat, unpredictable, things that happen to us that we have no control over. Although we think we control a great deal, I think we control very little. So the stronger you are in managing this lack of control, I think the stronger you are as an individual. Things fall apart, right? Mm-hmm. Things fall apart.
Right.
Siren Song is the last one in this piece, and this is a homage to the singing, and Nina Simone is in the foreground, and they're the worship. You see the hands raised to the skies, a trumpet player, the sort of praise that they're making to a divine sensibility that's in the sky. This idea that there is hope, there's something after this. Even though the struggle is very present, the storm, the clouds are very dark, very storming, one has to have faith. And the Siren Song is about having faith, that you hear the Siren Song. And of course, sailors would wait to hear, the Siren Song. They could hear the sirens. They would be very careful because in most cases they were drawing them into a rocky part of this waterway and damages the ships. And so the Siren Song is something we have to pay attention to. But in this particular case, it's the song of redemption. And as Bob Marley said, the only song he has is a song of redemption.
The color palette of this one is slightly different from the others.
Yes, and as I said, each time I painted one, I would do something different. I would push something. This is a bit brighter, and I create a lot of texture with acrylics, and then I would scrape over with a palette knife to get these accents, almost like the light is reflecting, and the corresponding orange in the background as if it's reflecting on the water. So each piece, I would try something I hadn't tried before. So this is done in black and white, and I had never did a painting in black and white. I've done charcoal drawings, but never a painting. So I thought I'd try it, and this is what came out.
I love on the left, in the main figure's hand too, the silhouette of the hands against the orange of the sky, and almost kind of pushing against the clouds at the top too.
Exactly, and brings it closer to you. It places you in relationship to the figure. You're only a few feet away from the actual figure if you can see that cast shadow like that.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful series.
Also, right?
I'm sorry?
You're in the water as well. The viewer is in the water as well.
So the viewer is in the same position as the figure in the front, kind of in the water with those figures.
Yep.
Right. Well, that is a wonderful series, so full of meaning and really interesting compositionally. Thank you for sharing those.
We have a chance to share with the public. I have not shown this series at all. I've just had it documented, and I was preparing it for a show in the spring in Atlanta, but the work has not been shown yet.
Well, we are honored to be showing it for the first time to the public then. Thank you.
Thank you. I started also a series of self-discovery where I would create an image in great detail. I did a number of these portraits. And then I would cover the portrait, I would paint it in great detail, and I would, complete the painting, but then I would cover it with ink, and then I would cover it with a house paint, and then I would put paint remover and strip it all the way down. So the notion was that I was stripping it down to get to the underlying layers of my own identity. So it's about finding me. And then I had one hand inside and one hand on the outside that was not affected in the same way, almost like you're looking through glass.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, again, self-discovery.
And so this is a series that you're doing?
I've done, this is the third one. Another is one called Stop, and it's just a hand coming up to stop you for a moment to ask that you consider what you're looking at and what we're doing and what we're thinking about. So my whole body of work, I think, through my entire life has been the one of redemption, about reflecting on myself, to have a truer sense of myself and the world that's around me. By pondering it, by ruminating on it, and creating a work of art is the evidence of that.
I had the pleasure of working with you on an exhibition in 2017 at the Lauren Rogers Museum of Art titled Contemporary Connections Woodcuts. We have an amazing collection of Japanese ukiyo-e prints at the Lauren Rogers Museum. And this exhibition was a celebration of that. And it looked at contemporary artists who were using that centuries-old medium of the woodblock print, but incorporating contemporary attitudes and using different approaches in their work. And your work was in the show as well, including this one, Shadows That Are Hidden, and we acquired it for the collection afterwards.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting is that I again was doing a series of works about what I understood of dynamics around me, people around me, and situations that we face. So the figure in the foreground is a woodcutter relief that I cut out, and that is my wife's mother, who at this point was 90 years old. On her lap is a Bible, because often when she's confronted with questions about her past, she only turns to the Bible. She won't answer those questions. So that was something that I have recognized. Now, the figures in the back was photographs of two women, vintage photographs from the 1930s. So I manipulated those photographs to create these two women as two daughters of this, the figure in the foreground, the woman. And the text is about their story. So the story is about one child that was raised without a father, and what we call illegitimate. The second daughter was raised with the father and a household, a traditional matrimony and family, which meant that the economics were also different. The relationship was also different. What was provided to the second daughter was different than what was provided to the first daughter because of the struggle. So that tension between them, not aggressive tension, but tension between them. One talks about her new cat and the things she has. The other one laments that she never had anything like that. So it's an interesting thing, because this kind of struggle of the first child can define who they are as a person. It could be what they call a psychology of lack, not having something. And one is hyper aware of the need to possess objects because they didn't have objects, the psychology of lack. So I was interested in investigating this. So I wrote the text myself, and this is almost life-size, if you recall. And I wanted to push the boundaries of that and bring those mediums together. So I'm very pleased with this piece. And these are shadows that are hidden, things that are in the shadows that aren't brought forward. And when they are, they can be very difficult to speak about inside of a family. But that dynamic is there.
And art historically, silhouettes, black on white backgrounds or white on black backgrounds, were called shadows or shades.
Yes.
So that's an interesting addition to that title.
And she had a chance to see this before she passed. I said, "That's you," you know. But I couldn't get her to talk about certain things.
She
and my wife is the daughter from that the first child is my wife. So they're aware of the dynamic.
Right. What does your wife think about the piece?
She loves it. She thinks it's a great piece, and a homage to her mother. So she tears up sometimes when she sees her mother, because it does capture her quite a bit, her physical gestures.
Well, we are excited to have it as part of our collection.
Great.
So you were recently honored with the Anyone Can Fly Foundation Lifetime Achievement Award and an honorary doctorate in art and philosophy from the Institute for Doctoral Studies in the Visual Arts. So what do these awards mean to you?
Oh, well, the first one was really major. I had a relationship with Faith Wingo for many years, friendship and collaboration in the studio, and she is the founder of the Anyone Can Fly Foundation. So I'd gone to many dinner parties on the occasion of the award being given out, and David Driscoll and Benny Andrews, Nelson Stevens, all these great artists were receiving the award. Camille Billups, and she informed me after many years that I would receive that award for my work that I've done as a printmaker, the Institute, and what I've done as an artist and collaborating with other artists. So I received it, and it was a great honor because I was always in the audience in the past, and I was on stage. So I was very honored by that and joining that company. And she was a great influence in my life. I often tell my wife, Glee, the only other woman I've loved beside my mother, Glee, has been Faith Ringo. She's done a lot for so many artists, including myself. Now, the award by the Institute in the Study of Visual Arts came about because of the work I've done with the Driscoll Center. When that institution was first founded by George Smith, I traveled with David Driscoll to Maine, where it was established, first started in Portland, Maine. And David became one of the board members. So I would meet the director and meet some of the artists, and I've always had a very positive relationship. I've always visited events, and they were always aware of my achievements in running the Driscoll Center and some of the exhibitions and programs, and they decided to honor me by giving me the doctorate award. Now, it's interesting. I went to the event at Carnegie Mellon in New York City, not Carnegie Mellon, the Morgan Library in New York City. And I'm sitting in a little cafe, and you have to wait, and you have to wait. And I called my daughter. I said, I'm really nervous about this. My daughter is my last child. Her name is Ananda, which is Ananda, not Amanda, but Ananda, and it means rapture and bliss. So we're very close, and both as a father and daughter, but also as friends. And I called her. I said, I'm so nervous about that. She said, well, Daddy, you earned it. So don't be nervous about it. Be confident about it. So I went, received the award, and I read a poem by a fellow artist of mine, a female poet, who speaks about, well, she writes about many things. And she was, again, a sort of bent arrow. She had a career as a teacher and then decided to be an artist. And she came and did a workshop with me. And she credits me with inspiring her to be an artist. She's a great book artist. Her name is Marianne Miller, and a great poetess. So she wrote a poem for me. I asked her to. And I asked her to write a poem about the transformation she went through as a young woman, someone who decided to become an artist, and who became a practicing artist in her 70s. And she wrote that poem, and it was such a great poem because it was, for me, the whole journey was about believing in your possibilities and what you can manifest in your life. There's a great book by James Baldwin called Artists on Fire. And there's a phrase in it where he describes artists as pulling his hanky completely out of his pocket. That is what we must do, is pull it out of the pocket completely. So Marianne did that, and I hope that's what I'm doing as well.
Wonderful. Curlee, thank you so much for this conversation today. It's truly an honor to be with you. We are.
What you have done for artists and how you have advanced their work and promoted my work as well. I appreciate that a great deal.
It is our pleasure. That is what museums are here for.
Oh, let me finish by saying,
yes.
One of the pleasures, I think I might have mentioned this to you. I was born in DeKalb, Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
I'd always wanted my work to be in Mississippi. And when you included in this show, it was like a dream come true that I had a presence in Mississippi, a place that I was born. So
wonderful.
That came in full circle.
Coming home.
Coming home. Great. So this has been wonderful to see you and to talk with you.
You too, Curlee. Thank you very much. And thanks to everyone who's joined us today. You can learn more about the museum at www.lrma.org. Thanks so much.